يسعد أوقاتكم. بظل الأزمة الاقتصادية اللي عم يقطع فيها لبنان، بيصيرنا نستضيف معنا مؤسس معهد فريزر الكندي دكتور مايكل وولكر. ليه دكتور مايكل قررنا اليوم يكون معنا؟ لأنه هالمعهد بيعمل دراسات ليشوف من خلالها دول أخرى قطعت بذات المحنة ويمكن أكثر وكيف تمت معالجتها. المعهد دايما بيشارك مع خبراء دوليين اللي اوريدي بيكونوا شاركوا مع خبراء اقتصاديين من كافة أنحاء العالم. اليوم حنستفيد من وجود دكتور مايكل وولكر معنا لنجرب نسمع منه شو عنده حلول ممكن تساعدنا بأزمتنا الاقتصادية اللي عم نقطع فيها. Welcome,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Michael.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. You are the founder of the Fraser Institute, the #1 think tank in Canada. Can you tell me more about the kind of work that Fraser does in Canada and the rest of the world?
Yes, well, we're an economic policy research institute, and we have a broad range of subjects that we look at. Anything about the economy, but very much about government policy. Our role is really to analyze the policies of government and to provide to the public information about those policies and what they're likely to do to the economy, and also to suggest alternative policies that would be better for Canada and for the different countries in which we work.
The Fraser Institute produces the Economic Freedom of the World Index. Can you tell me more about the index and the ranking of Lebanon?
Yes, well, the Fraser Institute produces this index and has been doing so. Well, our work started in 1984. And it took us 10 years to come up with a way to analyze countries. We now rank 167 countries in the world. What we are trying to measure is the extent to which people are free to engage in the kind of economic activity that they want to engage in. And so we measure 5 different aspects of the policies that governments undertake that either help or hinder people from being able to be free economically. We measure the level of taxation, we measure the level of regulation, we measure whether the banking arrangements of the country are properly managed by the central bank, whether there's inflation caused by the policies of the central bank, and so on and so on. So we measure everything, the effect of government on the ability of people to engage in ordinary economic transactions.
How can Lebanon improve on the economic freedom of the World Index?
Well, one of the things that I spoke yesterday to people out in the square who are demonstrating, and you know, the people in the square are primarily talking about corruption.
Sure.
Government is corrupt, government is corrupt. So that's, I think there is certainly some evidence that that's correct.
It's normal, no?
Well, in the case, Lebanon has a very low ranking by Transparency International as to the level of corruption. It's very corrupt according to, and so the question is why and what can be done about it. And so I started 40 years ago working in Latin America, and I found a lot of corruption in Latin America. And I came to understand that the producer of corruption is regulation. Because if a government employee, if you need a permit to do something, and you come to the government employee and say, I'd like to have that permit, and he says, well, I'm not going to give you the permit unless you give me a bribe. And so the reason why the the employee of the government can ask for a bribe is because they have power over you given by a regulation. So I came to the conclusion that regulation is the raw material of corruption. That you have to have regulation before corruption can happen. Yeah, so regulation is the problem. And so we analyze very carefully the situation in Lebanon and in all the other countries we measure. And Lebanon scores very badly in fact, 134 out of 167 countries in the level of regulation that you have. So you're right down at the bottom. And that's very much the same place that you are on the Transparency International Corruption Index. And so what we provide to the people of Lebanon in our work is the places where you can improve. You can improve your level of corruption by getting the government to take away a lot of the regulations on labor, on business, on credit markets, and
many things, I think.
Everything. There is so much regulation in Lebanon compared, and it's very important to note that we measure things relatively. So we look at all these countries. We don't just say, you're bad, Lebanon. We're saying, relative to all these other countries, you're down at the bottom. You're down at the bottom of the list. So there are all kinds of countries in the world who would do a better job of regulation. And we can't, this evening, I can't talk about the individual details here, but it's possible for people to go on our website, FraserInstitute.org, FraserInstitute.org, and get all of that information that we produce. And you can find Lebanon and see what are the problems that Lebanon has.
Very good job.
Yes, yeah.
Today people are running at the banks to withdraw their deposits. I would like to discuss with you the possible reaction to that, capital control and haircut. But let's start with capital controls. Can you explain this policy and tell us if the Lebanese banks should do it?
Well, there's a very curious situation here in Lebanon at the moment, in that it appears, I looked at there's not a lot of information available about these things in Lebanon. One of the things that I found very...
No information?
Well, there's not a lot of information, data that I could get to look at things very precisely, but it seems as though the banking system has been offering people deposits, bank accounts in both American dollars and in pounds, and it appears as though the reserves that are meant to be kept for ensuring that when you go to get your U.S. dollars, that enough U.S. dollars are there. In the normal course of events, the central bank, if you're in the United States and you have a U.S. dollar account, and a crisis happens, then the U.S. government will just print more U.S. dollars, or the Federal Reserve System will provide the bank with as many U.S. dollars as it needs to make people realize that they don't have to worry about their money, and therefore you don't get a bank run. You don't get a run on the banks, as it's called, or an attempt by people to pull all their money out because they know they can always get it. Now the problem here in Lebanon is that if people wanted to take pounds out of the Lebanese banks, I want my pound account.
So
no problem, because not to get your pounds out, because the Lebanese central bank can print more pounds, as many pounds as it takes. If everybody in Lebanon said they want to take their money completely out of the banking system, and put it under their
They
pillow.
will be empty.
No, the central bank will give them more because they have reserves. They have a large amount of government of deposits
Okay.
at the federal at your central bank, and they would be able to withdraw that. Unfortunately, the Lebanese central bank cannot print U.S. dollars.
Yes.
They can't
We
print
know
U.S.
that.
dollars. Yeah, and so the banking system is in a bit of trouble, I think, and that's why they are voluntarily agreeing to impose the withdrawal limit, which is now $1,000, I guess, a week, and in that way are hoping to give people, to stop running out of U.S. dollars, because there's U.S. dollars coming in as well. When people sell things outside the country, they get U.S. dollars in, and so they put them in their bank accounts, and so there's money coming in as well as money going out. If the worst happens and people say, I'm not putting any more U.S. dollars in, then you will have a currency crisis, and people will have to take Lebanese pounds because there aren't enough U.S. dollars in the country for everybody to be able to take their U.S. dollars out of their bank. I was surprised to find that there are apparently so many deposits in U.S. dollars. I understand why. Yeah, I understand why, because people don't particularly trust the currency, the local currency, and unfortunately, they find now that the same central bank that they don't trust for the pound is the one that has to stand behind their U.S. dollar deposits, and I fear that they would have some difficulty doing that. So whatever it takes to stabilize that situation is what they must do, and I guess slowing down the rate of people taking their deposits out is one measure of doing that. The unfortunate reaction, however, to controls is maybe to make people more nervous. Maybe to make them more nervous, and they will want even more to take their money out, and then so it's a very unhappy situation, and there is no solution that I could take out of my pocket. There's no solution, no, not for that. There's a solution to the problem of corruption. There's a solution to the problem of why the Lebanese economy is not as vibrant as it once was, and that's to get rid of these regulations. To stop regulating it. Get Lebanon #1 in the world with regard to regulation, not number 134. Because being in number 134, you have some very bad, it's like Russia is down in that territory, and Kyrgyzstan is down in that territory. So there's a lot. That's not a place where Lebanon should be. You should be at the top of these ratings, and you're not.
Can you tell me? Can you tell me about other countries that had a haircut? What were the consequences, and should lenders take a haircut on Lebanese bonds?
Well, now haircuts. This is a very interesting subject. First of all, I haven't mentioned haircuts. Now, haircuts is something completely different. This is about the bonds, the bonds that the government of Lebanon has issued, and the government of Lebanon has issued Euro bonds, for example, in euros, and those bonds this year have lost 30%. The bonds that are due in 2034, 14 years from now, they have fallen by 30% this year. 30%. Now, what do I mean by fallen? When people, you see, once a bond is issued, it's issued with a certain interest rate, and those are, I think, 12% on those bonds. And now when people get nervous and they worry about whether in 2034 the government is going to be able to pay those bonds back in euros, they say, I'm not going to keep the bond, I'm going to sell it. And when they try to sell it, the buyers have been saying, well, I don't believe they're going to pay all the money back either. So I'll give you 20% less than the face value, or 30. As it happens now this year, the value has fallen 30% from where it was at the beginning of the year. So already the bondholders of 2034 bonds have taken a haircut in the sense that their bond is no longer worth what it was worth when the government issued it. Now, if they hold the bond till 2034, of course they will get their money if the government of Lebanon if the government of Lebanon has the euros to pay them back. But the reason why they're taking a haircut is because the market thinks that they're not going to be able to pay back those bonds. So this is a very tragic circumstance. It's tragic. And the solution right now for Lebanon is not, I believe, to say, you know what, the market is right. We're not going to pay the bonds back. We're not going to pay back the dollar bonds. We're not going to pay back the pound bonds that we have outstanding. So we're going to take a haircut. We're going to give everybody a haircut, which means we're going to drop the value. We're going to confirm what the markets have already predicted, that Lebanon is not good for these bonds. Now, the reason why I say the government should not do that is because I have watched on many, many different occasions the government of Argentina, facing the same problem. Instead of dealing with the fundamental problem, which is that the government is spending too much money and not having enough tax revenues to cover it. So the government has been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and spending and spending and spending.
Spending the money.
Spending the money. Yeah. And maybe it's spending it on good things, but there's some suggestion here that some of it is going out through corruption. And whatever it's being used for, the government is not sustainable as it stands right now. Sure. But the solution to that problem is not to say, okay, it's the bondholders who will have to pay for this. Because what happens then is, it becomes, you can give the bondholders who are currently in the market a haircut. The market has already given them, the euro bondholders, a haircut of 30% this year. Okay. You can give you can say, yep, the market is right. We're going to cut the local bonds by 30% as well. But when they come to issue their next bond, what will people say? Will they say, oh yeah, I'll buy more bonds from you, Lebanon. Oh, sure, I don't mind taking haircuts. No, they won't. And that's what happens. It becomes more and more difficult for a country to issue bonds. And then what do? They issue lots of money. They issue lots of, because they can print pounds. You just turn on the printing press, they can print the pounds. But what will happen then? Inflation. Big time inflation. And so there's no easy way out of this situation.
Yes, we know that.
A haircut,
the
haircut is not the way to go. A default is not the way to go. The way to go is to look at what is the fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is not enough control over expenditure, too much regulation that we document in our studies, too much regulation. And that is where the government must turn. And Lebanon needs a leader, somebody who is the next leader, to say, enough is enough. We're not going to do that. We're not going to become the Argentina of the Middle East. Yeah. Lebanon was a great, strong country. We're the best.
Really, we hope that.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
that's what has to happen. And so, you know, our data just show how
We are now in danger.
you are in great danger,
Yeah.
and we know why. As I say, we published why you're in great danger, and then I have no stake in Lebanon. I have no I have no malice toward Lebanon. We're just showing what the data show, and the data show that you're in the worst company. The people that are like Lebanon, you don't want to be with right now. You want to get up to where Lebanon was in previous times.
Why is the Lebanese pound losing its value against the dollar, and how can we restore the exchange rate?
Well, the exchange rate is reflecting what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
People don't want to hold pounds because they think the future of holding pounds is not great. That's why they took those US dollar deposits, thinking that they were moving out of Lebanon and into US dollars. But unfortunately, the deposits are not the same as having a US dollar. In the United States, they're the same as having a US dollar because the Federal Reserve can always print US dollars. Here, the Lebanese government can only print Lebanese dollars, Lebanese pounds. Yeah, Lebanese pounds. Well, if people say, I don't want to hold Lebanese pounds, I want to hold US dollars, the value of the Lebanese currency falls and the value of the dollar in Lebanese rises. Yeah. So you have to pay more and more and more and more pounds to get, and that's why the government says the exchange rate is 1,515. Well, what's the actual exchange rate? If you try to get exchange on the street, it's 16, it's 17, it's 18, 19, whatever. Yeah. And that's like a popularity contest. You know, the people are saying, I don't want to hold them. That's why the exchange rate falls. So how does the government get people more confident about the future? They have to do what comes out of the numbers. They have to deal with the problem of regulation. Mm-hmm. They have to deal with the problem of too much spending. They do have to do that. Sooner or later, they have to do it. If they wait till later, they'll also have to deal with the fact that the pound has now fallen through the floor. Everybody will want to have US dollars. Nobody will want to have pounds. And then the problems become much, much more severe because now you have massive inflation along with everything else. And so the government has a very narrow window to say we are not going to become the Argentina of the Middle East.
If you are advising the Lebanese government, what policies would you recommend they adopt?
Well, the number one policy they have to adopt is to reduce their expenditures. Reduce their expenditures more into line with the revenues. Yeah. The second thing, and probably even more important, is to get the level of regulation in the country down so that people in Lebanon can get on with the business of creating wealth and making new businesses and the other things which they're stopped from doing now by regulations which stymie economic activity. I mean, we know, you know, this has been studied so many times now over the past 30 years. Regulation is a job killer. Regulation is a business killer, and you got to get rid of them. You've got to deal with them, particularly if you've also got a problem of your currency. If you've got a lack of confidence in the country, you've got to really take strong action. Stop spending, stop regulating, and let the economy come back. Let people make. Lebanese people are admired around the world. Yes. Yeah, let the Lebanese people do what they do better than anybody else in the world if they're given a chance. They've been doing it since thousands of years. The people of this place have been showing the world how to trade, how to deal, how to make a deal. And it's criminal that these great people are not being permitted to show the world what they can do because of regulation.
Privatization. Je parle le français, je sais de parler l'anglais. Privatization is a problem in Lebanon because people are worried about giving government assets to friends of politicians. How do you solve this problem?
Well, this is a problem. I mean, first of all, privatization is something that I started working on in 1979. So this is an old story. I've worked with people in different parts of the world on privatization. And the most important thing in a privatization process is that you have transparency, that you really allow the highest bidder to purchase the asset, and therefore you make it available to the world. You don't just have your friends down the block who can bid on the project, and you have to, and there's no mystery about how this can be done. It's been done in many countries. I gave the example yesterday to the people of Mrs. Thatcher's privatization in Britain. 60% of the British economy was owned by the government. In 1979, when she took office, 60% of the assets in the country were owned by the government. The airline was owned by the government, all the railways, the buses, you name it, the government owned it. The coal mines. And so what Mrs. Thatcher said was, we need to give some of these assets, we need to give it to the British people, and we need to sell other parts of it to companies who will produce money for the Treasury and take over those assets and run them as they should be run as private businesses. The main problem with government running things, as we talked about with regulation, is that if the government has got an asset, it is so tempting to be corrupted. It's so tempting to give your friends that. And so when you want to get rid of it, you're trying to get rid of that cronyism, that helping your friends through a public company. Then you have to make sure that you do the privatization in a way that gets around that you don't just give it to your cronies. That's what's happened in Tunisia. It's happened in other countries, just around in this area. And so you don't want to do that. There's ways to do it correctly and ways to do it badly. And so if you do the privatization should be done by bringing in experts from Britain or from the United States or from Canada or some other country who know how to do privatization and know how to do it well, without corruption, and making sure that the Lebanese people who actually own these assets, these are not the assets of the government, they're your assets, and the cameraman's assets.
Yes.
These are the assets of the people of Lebanon. And so the people of Lebanon should get the value of that in the form of revenue to reduce the public debt. Because a lot of the money that a lot of this debt that is out there is because of these public assets. And so the public assets should be used to defray the debt and get Lebanon back into a position so the Lebanese people can be free to succeed and more strong. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Walker. You are most welcome here in Lebanon.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about this.
هون بنكون وصلنا لختام هالحلقة. بنتمنى تكونوا استفدتوا من الحلول اللي جرب يعطينا هي دكتور مايكل. بدي اتشكر المعهد اللبناني لدراسات السوق بشخص استاذ باتريك معديني يلي اكيد كان في تنسيق بيننا وبينهم لتم هاللقاء مع دكتور مايكل ووكر. شكرا لحسن متابعتكم لنا، وأكيد لقاءات أخرى بتجمعنا فيكم عن قريب.